Okay, anarcho-capitalism is a stateless society with no laws.
It's a place with no laws. Yeah, it's a place with no legislation, and legislation being words written down on paper by politicians, people claiming to have rights that other people's don't, and a monopoly on that right. Um, I mean, 2 seconds in, he's wrong. He assumes that it's literally like saying you don't want government providing food, so you want a foodless society. No, in the same way, we just don't think that law or achieving social cohesion is best achieved by giving one group a violent monopoly on imposing their will on the masses. So, seconds in, he's wrong. And this is important because it's the foundation. This is the first building block of his argument, and we're already somewhere we shouldn't be.
Yeah, and I mean it's the classic no rulers, not no rules.
There is something called the non-aggression principle, where you don't have the right to inflict on another. Sounds great in principle. I'm now seeing that it is probably evil.
And so how would you grade his definition of the non-aggression principle as well? Because I think, it's not a great definition, but he also doesn't understand it in practice, as we'll see.
It's bad because he doesn't. I mean, it's not horrible, but I think the words he uses, you have no right to inflict. Inflict is vague because, in the same way, the no harm principle is vague because anytime you criticize someone, you are, in a sense, doing something that is against their will that they wouldn't really like. The question is whether or not you have a right to do it, not whether someone is being affected or harmed. By me shopping at X instead of Y store, I am negatively affecting them. Am I inflicting on them if, a woman breaks up with me? Is she inflicting on me? That's why aggression it's important to define that as the initiation of violence or uninvited physical interference or fraud, of course. And the reason it's both of those is because they both violate consent.
How do you stop an 8-year-old who wants to get $1,000 for sucking an old man's dick? Go.
But yeah, asking people to come up on the spot with solutions, of course, is playing the gotcha game and the specific game where you can go, what about this? What about that? Hey, Owen, what if there's a government and they nuke 100,000 people? Then what happens? Hey, Owen, what if there's a Federal Reserve who totally devalues the currency and impoverishes the populace? Hey, Owen, what if the government kills 90 peaceful Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas? Let's play that game. Just those hypotheticals. Let's say there's a world war, but instead of happening once, it happens twice. Like, hypothetically, what would happen then? I mean, this game is so dumb, and it applies more to him than it ever could to us.
Damn, dude, you're so good at this. I'm so glad.
I'm just so sick of people thinking they have good points, and of course, coming off with this, all this confidence, and you tell me what happens, people online. It's just a joke.
Yeah, no, it is.
The non-aggression principle says you cannot stop a sovereign individual from engaging in commerce. An 8-year-old says, I have a service. I want to suck an old man's dick. And the old man says, I want my dick sucked from an 8-year-old for $1,000. What stops that? In the chat, I'm watching you. An 8-year-old that says, please, sir, I want to suck this old man's dick for money. And the old man's like, yes. How do you stop that? Go.
The reason it's wrong to do that with an 8-year-old and not a 31-year-old is it violates consent. They don't have the capacity to consent to intercourse, signing onto a mortgage, driving a motor vehicle, employment, long-term, certainly. So, yeah, I think he's totally wrong on there. But then again, 30-year-olds sometimes don't have the ability to consent. If they're severely mentally challenged, if they're in a coma, if they are really, really drunk, you don't have, I wouldn't, say that you can enforce that contract that someone signed when they were blackout drunk or something. So it's not just an age thing. It's a degree thing, even within ages. So now, of course, the fact that this is so complex is why is reason 5 million why there shouldn't be a monopoly on deciding things like this, and you should have competing agencies, none of which have a monopoly right no other organization has. Because if they get a bad idea, then we're screwed.
The old man's aggressing since the 8-year-old can't consent. Okay, thank you for falling for the first trap. What is the age of consent and why, and who enforces it? Go.
All right. So right now, the age of consent is arbitrarily decided by a legislature.
It's so hard to exactly define consent. It's consent when two adults, exchange something. Well, what if one is mentally challenged? Define mentally challenged. What if they're 19 and they're immature, but they're 17 and they're really mature? Then which one is consenting and which one isn't? What if they've had a glass of wine? What if they've had 3 glasses of wine but a high tolerance? Getting into these technicalities is, of course, difficult. But the point is,
it's
the
doable.
difficulty in pointing to an exact age, an exact moment where one consents and one does not consent also applies to a monarchist society, a statist society, a fascist, a communist, a syndicalist, a socialist, and an capitalist. So what he's saying is this complex thing exists. You people put an exact point on it, when in reality it applies to everything else. And dear God, it's annoying to hear him just ask the chat for specifics, as if, like, I wouldn't just walk up to, a group of Occupy Wall Streeters and then say, explain to me why the state gets a monopoly on taxation. Go. Someone start talking. If you really want to address something, you find the best arguments for it.
What's the age of consent? 9, 10, 11, 12. When do I stop? Say stop. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Say stop. And Stefan Molyneux, whose mother almost beat him to death, should know better. Okay, go. What's the age of consent? Who enforces it and why? Go. Nothing. Dude, a pedo is violating the NAP, so any violence against him is in violation. That's wrong, Brandon. If an 8-year-old consents to the exchange of blowjob for money, how does that doesn't break that breaks the NAP if you stop him? Well, if he's too young to consent. Okay, 9, 10, 11, 12. Tell me when to stop and why. 13, 14, 15. Why? I don't know. You don't have a basis. You're built your whole philosophy on sand.
So this is just the fallacy of putting an obligation on someone and then saying, I'm waiting, where is it? Making it seem as though they can't supply you with what you've asked. When meanwhile, I don't know how many NCAPs are there at the time, how many are logged in to reply. It's just so weak, but that's not really an argument. My main thing is he's taking this thing. It's hard to determine an exact age of consent or mental mindset, or defining a mental mindset in which consent can be given. Therefore, the NAP is invalid. That's the ultimate non sequitur because it applies to all children in all societies pretty much at all times. So, yeah.
After the father kicks him out of the house. So if the father never kicks the groomed pedophile child out of the house and keeps him till he's 40 on a leash in the basement, who stops that? Go ahead. The parents decide. The parents decide. Okay, so at what age does the child get to speak for himself? Go. Bible talks about age consent at 7. Well, it's 3 in the Talmud. Yeah. When you see an anarcho-capitalist and a libertarian, just ask them this, and then say, if you can't answer it and you remain that, you're a pedophile.
Just in the same way that no singular person knows how to make a pencil from start to finish.
Yeah.
We can't sit here and say that there's no court that would ever come up with factors to determine who was competent. These things exist already. And 2, there's also, theories of contract law where the courts will determine, okay, well, what happens when a 16-year-old contracts for a car and the car company doesn't realize that the 16-year-old person is not 16. The 16-year-old person buys the car but defaults on their obligations or crashes the car or something, and now the car company wants to get repaid. Okay. What happens? Do we hold the 16-year-old to the contract or not? Even though they weren't capacitated. They weren't the age of majority at the time they contracted for it. What do? Okay, well, we look to see how mature the 16-year-old is. We look to see, you know, what the living circumstances of the 16-year-old is. What exactly are they contracting for? Are they supporting their other family members? Do they have a job? How are their grades? You know, do they understand what's going on? You know, there's ways to address this that the courts, I'm sure, would.
14, or puberty, when certain changes happen, society enforces it. What is society? And what is puberty and why? What if someone never goes through puberty? What constitutes puberty? Fertility? Larger breasts? What if someone's infertile for life? If someone's infertile for life, can they never consent? Go! You can't enforce it if the age of consent is too low. What makes low and high? Go! You can get emancipated at 14. Someone just says 12. Why? Are you the king? Are you the ruler? Are you the state? Go!
This is not going to be part of my argument. It's just more of an observation. But it's just sad when you ask someone to play the psychic game. What did he say? Like, what happens or who stops that? Do you want me to give you the name of the people who are going to do that? I mean, really, you're asking something that is so ridiculously impossible for us to name. I mean, look at this book right here. Something as simple as this book, words on paper, I have no clue how it's made. What I do know is that it's better achieved by competing groups that are funded voluntarily, not some state monopoly who kills anyone who tries to compete or doesn't chip in for it. So, I mean, I'd be lying to you if I said, well, the person who's going to stop that is going to be Joseph Anderson, and he's going to have a 9mm on his right hip, and he's going to walk up and say, "Old man Jones, hands up or I'll shoot." There's no way we can know that. You're lying if you say you know how that'll happen. That's why the philosophical principles are so much better to embrace, and it's such a much more effective use of time than anything else.
Well, right, yeah, but I mean, in the same way that, so you give the example of the book, like, there's no way that you could know how this book would be made or who would make it, I suppose. But if you had someone who was in the book manufacturing business who would sit you down and say, okay, well, maybe this hasn't been completely done before in modern society in this applicable instance, but I can explain to you how I think it might be done, you know.
And also, we don't know what keeps kids more safe. The existence of a state police or gun ownership or non-compulsory education laws. Maybe that would yield more safety for children in the aggregate. I don't know what the key is, but for me to play the psychic game is to lie and to buy into that nonsense. I'm sorry, I think I interrupted you.
No, you didn't. Well, I think you're right, though. As opposed to me not being quite as right in this situation, because I think I have an idea of exactly, you know, the way that my ideal legal system might handle it. But your whole point that you just made is saying that, well, you know, I might have this idea, but it might be something completely out of the box of even what I'm trying to conceive of within the legal realm. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so we could have all these different factors, you know, maybe a culture that would discourage pedophilia, or a neighborhood that was really hypervigilant and had really good community watch organizations, or neighbors that really knew each other and watched out for each other's kids and all that.
Because under true ANCAP philosophy, if a serial pedophile who gets children to say they want him, you can't do anything to that guy. That's a contractual exchange of goods and services. The Christian can put a bullet in the pedophile's head, guilt-free. Means no rulers, not no rules. Who enforces rules without rulers? Go. Who enforces rules without rulers? Answer that. Do you know what a rule? Do you know creation comes from what? A creator. A rule comes from what? A ruler. Go.
I would envision a system where you have, you know, your competing court systems and arbitration systems where you have to, for your own mutual benefit and to protect yourself, you would have to subscribe to an arbitration system. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to, you know, press charges against someone or try to enforce a contract. You wouldn't have anyone that would step in to protect you. maybe, but it would be to your own benefit to subscribe to this arbitration organization. When you have a child, they enter into a system whereby you become a trustee of your child's rights. And trustees, a trust relationship is one of the most sacred relationships that the law can endow, is where you hold on to something for the benefit of a third party. And this legal relationship has a lot of principles built into it. You have to be a prudent trustee, and you have to act in good faith. You can't, you have to do all the things for the benefit of the beneficiary, who is going to get the trust assets, or the rights of the trust in this instance, upon the time when they come of age. Usually it's 18, or when they become capacitated. And so I would just envision there's a system where, you, in order to continue being represented by this arbitration organization, you have to become a trustee of your child's rights and hang on to it until they can apply for emancipation, or until they reach an arbitrary age and are deemed competent. I think that's a pretty good system. Whereas children who are born without parents, there, I assume, would be charitable organizations, or the arbitration agency would step in and take care of their legal systems, or take care of their legal rights. Or you would have this orphanage or foster parents step in and become the trustee of their rights, which are held, I guess, in escrow, you could say. I think this was Rothbard's position as well.
I'm a libertarian, so I'd say God wants us to follow it. There is no God in libertarianism. There is no God. 18, 16, 16. Okay, why? And who enforces it? Go. No, guys, the moral people, you don't need to participate in this. This is only for libertarians and ANCAPs. You can say 16. 18 is the law. Okay, there is no law in a stateless society. Age of accountability. What makes you accountable? 16, 18, 18, 25. 25 when the brain becomes an adult. So 24-year-old Stefan Molyneux can still be kept in his mother's home? Go. Explain that one. Consent after marriage. Well, that's what I believe, but that's Christian. Go. 18, why? 21, why?
But how can you have an objective morality without a deity, he kind of says. But, I mean, no one is making the argument that there's no laws in an anarcho-capitalist society. And maybe he's conflating this argument with the fact that he doesn't understand where laws could come from without someone dictating it from the top. But that's just untrue and ridiculous. And you don't see that in the world. I've done work on how law can come about in customary legal systems. I think that's libertyweekly.net/36.
Yes. Guys, I am for killing pedophiles, not torturing them, killing them. I'm dismantling a stateless society argument. And no one can back up what they have. Not thousands of people right now. Thousands. How do you stop Desmond the groomed from dancing in a bar for homosexual pedophiles for money in a stateless society, in an amoral society, in a society without Christianity, without God? How?
We believe in the non-aggression principle and the absolutism of property rights. Period. Point blank. What Owen Benjamin does, and I believe in this video, he identifies himself as being a libertarian. He might just be reading off the comments of what people are saying to him on YouTube, but what he does here is attach things to the non-aggression principle. And what a lot of people do is attach what they're ultimately trying to do is they have their own version of morality, and it doesn't abide by the NAP, but they have their own version of morality, and they try and enforce it on everyone else. And I think that's what Owen Benjamin does in a lot of his politics.
Why did ANCAP work in South Africa before the British invaded the Boers? Christianity, dumb fuck. You can't have a stateless society without God, without Christianity, and those who serve God. That isn't part of the ANCAP philosophy, guys. ANCAP, there is a code and law, natural law. You have to be part of natural law to do that. So you can't be an atheist in a stateless society, or else you will fuck a kid and no one will do anything about it.
No child safety without a state is the same as saying no morality without God. It's the ultimate non sequitur. It's, I don't really have a point, so I'm just going to say it only exists because God, because government. I guess he's saying that morality exists only because there was a God, and only a state can enforce it. But either way, I wonder what he would say about God violating the rights of children when he drowned the entire earth and only saved Noah and some animals.
Or what about
hey, Owen Benjamin, write in the chat right now. Give me an answer of why God killed millions of people and only saved a couple guys on a boat. Tell me. Go. I'm waiting. Manipulatively sip a cup of coffee. Go.
So Mohammed marrying a 9-year-old is more moral because he married her for life than the ANCAPs. Uh-oh. It's just wrong regardless. Why, John? Why? You try to replace God, you end up backed into a corner like I just backed you into a corner, you little doggy. Bitch. Why? Why would you say that it's just wrong? Because God says it's wrong. There's a lot of people alive right now that do not believe that is wrong. In fact, they think, read the literature from the Man-Boy Love Association. There's people right now in your Congress, in your parliament, at your kids' schools, the head of media companies that think not only is it not wrong, it's sexy to fuck a child. So how do you stop that if you believe in the stupid non-aggression principle?
Isn't it interesting, like in the midst of all the pedophiles coming out of government, between scandals in the UK, scandals in Australia, and now in America with Epstein coming down, we have the Bohemian Grove, we have the Franklin scandal, we have Kathy O'Brien and Bryce Taylor and Ted Gunderson coming out saying pedophiles run government. In other words, the fear that, well, this bad thing might happen in the absence of a state already happens when there is a state. Now, if you're talking about whether or not it's going to happen, that's one thing. But if he's saying the philosophy in and of itself condones it, that's actually something different. What were you going to say?
Yeah, sorry. I mean, moreover, the statist system institutionalizes this pedophilia, is that he's so up in arms about. So, like you said, with all of this coming out and seeing that the system protects these pedophiles, and he's worried about what might happen in absence of the system that protects pedophilia. I mean, you can say, I mean, even more, you could say, I guess, more about the culture of how, this transgender and all the progressive left now are celebrating children being with gay men. And there's pictures of this all over the internet and pride parades and having, that's a whole different issue. Maybe that's a cultural issue, but this already exists in this society.
I know the terrible fear that people think what might happen actually does happen when you do have a state. So bringing there being bad things happening in this example, pedophilia, there being bad things happening does not justify the existence of a ruling class any more than it says bad things happen, such as pedophilia. Therefore, the Catholic Church should have a monopoly on legislation. That is the root of the argument right there. That is the logical fallacy. Jones's printing house should have a monopoly on laws because bad things might happen. That doesn't justify your position at all. It just proves that if you really are against something, wanting to make sure this bad thing doesn't happen, make sure you don't have a monopoly that collects its funds coercively. Make sure you have competing agencies that have to collect funds voluntarily if they don't meet consumer demand.
A private community society enforces it. That's breaking the non-aggression principle. So a small government of community enforces it how?
Okay, well, if the community is voluntary and everyone pledges to follow the rules of the community, that isn't really breaking anything. I mean, that's kind of what they're talking about.
Yeah, but even if you're not part of my voluntary community.
That's
I have
still
I have the right to stop you from initiating such severe violence as the case he's mentioning in this case, which he's mentioning rape pretty much in this case. So yeah, absolutely. It's not even necessarily, it's general ideas that arise when people interact and what people feel morally justified in enforcing themselves. For example, I know we exhausted this last time when we talked about Ayn Rand, but the idea that there's no laws in Ancapistan, well, whenever you go to a different city, county, state, or country especially, it's not like you read all the laws and then you're ready to walk over the geographical line and then you can participate. You never read the laws. You basically just go there, interact with people, and it's much more spontaneous than, thank God the politicians wrote words down on paper or we wouldn't know what to trade, in what quantity, for what reason, what constitutes fraud.
You know, once you go from one jurisdiction to the next, you have to read up on all the rules. Well, not only that, but there are competing rules in the same geographic area, even in the system that we live in. You know, there are county ordinances, there are city ordinances, there are the overarching state law, there's the federal law. And sometimes these laws, not all the time, but sometimes these laws conflict with each other. Oh, how do we figure out how this would work? How do we do that? Oh, well, ANCAPism is invalid then because there's different laws that apply to the same geographical area. No, we have a court system to figure that out. And
even when there are objective laws, like it's pretty clear cocaine is not allowed in America for anyone. So then how is it here? Well, that just goes to show you that just because it's a law, one, doesn't mean it's enforced, whether you agree with the cocaine or not. Simply making a law does not stop the thing you're trying to stop from happening.
So an 8-year-old says, a 12-year-old, let's make it more complicated. A 14-year-old wants to suck a 70-year-old man's dick for $1,000. How do you enforce it? You enforce it yourself? Who do you enforce? The kid wants to, and the old man wants to. When a child is groomed, they don't know that it's wrong. We're all groomed on some level for something, whether or not the fact we commit to language. I mean, I think human beings can enter a realm where we don't even need language. That's just me.
So it went from, the child doesn't know they're being manipulated because they're groomed. Everyone is groomed. An example of grooming is language. We don't even need language. Isn't it funny? A guy who's in the cult of statism can think of a world where there's no language, but can't think of a world in which one group doesn't have a monopoly on enforcing children's rights. I mean, doesn't that just go to show you how deep he is into this belief that he just can't let go? Must have a state, but I can think of any society possible, but not one without a government.
I can think of a society without language, but I can't think of a society without government.